They told me the river here ran like old tea, and that the forest could hear you think. I didn't believe the second part, but I wrote it down anyway. The way you write down a superstition to keep it from touching you. My name is 𝗦𝗓𝗗𝗢𝗦, ethnobotanist and field recordist, and I came for a plant the old notes called the mother that listens. The float plane dwindled to a speck above the green, leaving me with Tomas on a warped plank dock where the water idled against mud. He handed me a paddle, although he would be the one rowing. After dusk, he said in Portuguese, so clipped it sounded folded shut. No voices. He said it like, don't touch the fence. Practical, unnegotiable. It was the word voices that snagged. We slid upriver in a narrow aluminum boat with a motor that sounded like a sewing machine pushing through denim. The recorder in my lap hummed into my thighs. I checked levels every few minutes, half habit, half superstition. The Amazon breathed from all directions. Cicadas laying their bright rail of sound. Frogs skittering like thrown beads. The slap of something unseen near the surface. A woodpecker ticking code into a dead trunk. I pressed my headphones to my ears, just to revel in how much there was to hear. Then, between one breath and the next, the sound ended, not faded. It was as if someone removed the river from the river. Thomas lifted a hand and let the motor idle. The wake made no voice. The vines that tapped our shoulders made no tick. I laughed because the body tries to repair a broken rule with anything it has at hand. My laugh lived inside my mouth and nowhere else. The levels on the recorder hopped as if air moved. On playback, I got a patient, gray band of nothing, a soft electricity that had learned manners. We beached at a clutch of stilt houses, their knees scarred by last season's flood. A pot steamed on a charcoal stove that did not hiss. A hammock swayed as if someone had just left it. Toys lay where a child had dropped them mid-game. The rooms were mid-sentence, interrupted. We called greetings, and because we could not hear them, we over-enunciated, sending the shapes of words away, like children who would not return. In the long house, 4 people waited with their hands folded. An elder woman with river-gray hair, a broad-shouldered man with old rope scars in his palms, a girl with dust on her shins and a dog the color of wet bark. The elder touched her lips and drew her finger down. The zipper any child would know. She stepped to me and tied a vine around my wrist. A thin brown thing with the seed pods small as teeth. She did not smile or frown. She watched me the way a midwife watches breath. I set my recorder on the boards between us. Its red eye blinked, trying to matter in a place that refused to be caught. Night lowered like a lid. Breath should have been loud. It wasn't. I felt mine in my throat like a secret. The dog's chest rose and fell without sound, so it looked like a photograph of breathing. Tomas took my field book and drew quickly. A frilled leaf. A child with an ear shaded in. A stump with an ear carved into it. A canopy with a down arrow. Under the canopy he wrote the rule and underlined it twice. He drew an ear and slashed it. He slid the book back. I wrote, what hunts? He wrote, what hears? Sleep came in stitched pieces. When I gave up, the sky had put on a thin cloth of stars. I lifted the recorder to my mouth and whispered my name just to prove I existed. Playback gave me that same civil hum, refusal humming like patience. In a storage hut that smelled of rope and fish oil and the iron and blood, I found a shoebox of cassettes labeled in a careful hand. The elder saw me pause and nodded once. Permission. I clicked one into my little player and the tape hissed, a familiar salt, Then a man's voice arrived, waver thin, obedient to time. Season of forgetting. The jungle closes its mouth. We do not speak after dusk. We make marks instead. We leave food at the stump with the carved ear. The mothers blow leaf into the children as ears. So dreams one, to carry sound out. The voice paused. The tape chewed and steadied. The baby cried. The rest became hiss, and the click of a stop I had not pressed. If it had only been a stranger's field note, I would have filed it where oddities go. But when I rewound to the place where the hiss thickened, another sound opened like a door you took for a closet and found to stare. My mother's laugh. Not a laugh like hers. Hers. She had been dead 9 months. We never recorded her laugh. The player warmed in my hands. I remembered her cheek against my hair when I mispronounced a Latin name. The soft correction. The smug pride. I shut my eyes and did not cry, because the rules sat at the door like a kind guard. At dawn, the elder crushed a frilled leaf between finger and thumb. Green to darker green to smell. Wet, cool, like a cucumber swallowed by rain. She breathed the powder toward the sleeping girl's ear, and the air dimpled at the edge as if consenting to division. Bunches of those leaves hung from cords around the house, like amulets against an unnamed thing. We ate in silence, rice and river fish and porridge that tasted of old peanuts. It was not an enforced silence, not a sulk. It was the quiet of surgeons and divers, and people who share a room with a sleeping animal they do not want to wake. I tested without breaking. I hummed scales into the mic and watched meters climb. On playback, the hum was the same, polite and uninformative. I clapped once behind the dog. He flinched without sound and looked at me with mild disappointment that made me feel worse than a bark. I called my lab S-line on the satellite phone and watched the timer count 2 minutes of me not existing anywhere but in the work of my throat. Somewhere in fluorescent air, a board operator wrote no message and moved on. Curiosity is vanity when you think you can enter holy ground unchanged. I wanted to know whether the leaves were buffers or badges, or the way fear binds itself to a ritual so it can sleep. I wanted to know what sat in the canopy when the world removed its voice. So I went, and because we do these things badly, I went at dusk. The path to the grove narrowed until the leaves brushed both shoulders. A confession booth you could get lost in. Above, the canopy met like steepled fingers over a mouth. The attention in the air had no temperature and still felt warm, a hand not touching your cheek. I lifted the recorder like an offering and pressed record. It's me, I mouthed, and regretted even the shape of my lips. There is movement you don't see so much as register. The way a crowd shifts when someone unthinkable arrives. The way a lake forgets a fish for you. Between trunks, between leaves, a wrongness traveled without urgency. When I thought of my mother, the wrongness leaned. When the dog turned in its dream back in the village, the wrongness inclined. When my body rehearsed the shape of a scream, the wrongness stilled as if the thought was a sound, and it wanted the exact address. I stepped on a wet root and slid. The old, foolish word leaped to my tongue like it had trained there. I did not speak it. I felt it. The canopy responded as if letters had mass. Leaves adjusted. Trunks, huge, indifferent, ticked toward me the width of a thumbnail. If you've never been the focus of a forest, it reads like melodrama. If you have, you know, trees have opinions, and they are older than yours. I ran the way you run in a dream, effortful, boots deciding to own my ankles. The recorder burned my palm, heat like an animal. The file, gummy and gray, flipped into a thread of impossible sound. My mother saying the nickname she, D, abandoned when I learned enough Latin to be insufferable. "Mayu," she said, just before children step off curbs. Instinct is an organ. It wanted me to answer. The rule is a spine. I kept my mouth closed. The clearing appeared all at once, a circle that felt intentional, which made me angry because intent has owners. In the center stood a stump with an ear carved into its face. Simple, competent, a child's drawing by a practiced hand. On the flat, offerings, fish wrapped in leaf, a twist of salt, a bead the color of a healing bruise. I set the recorder there with care I usually reserve for living things. The red eye stared. I wanted to kneel and spend every syllable I had on names until I was bankrupt. I wanted to throw voice-like coins and consider wishing done. I kept my hands at my sides and the names in my head. The forest withdrew like tide, not embarrassed, not beaten, simply returning to its shape once my gravity let go. The path did not trip me. The village breathed out and pretended relief had no volume. Birds returned in layers, one brave throat, then two, then the gossip you forgive, because it means the world remembers itself. The elder untied my vine bracelet and let the pods tick against my wrist. The small sound of truth aloud again. She pressed my palm to the leaf bundle above the doorway and made the zipper gesture, blessing not order. I nodded like a person who would not go home and put this under fiction in a report I wanted funded. Back in the city where noise is manners, I built explanations like scaffolds. I put the cassettes on a shelf and told myself I'd digitize them when the money behaved. I told myself the voicemail with no caller ID that lasted 2 seconds and contained my mother laughing at my mistake on 𝗦𝗬𝗙𝗦𝗬 was a glitch with taste. I told myself the single-breast leaf I cataloged as unconfirmed species that smells like rain did not hum at dawn, a hum that made my molars ache until I set the recorder beside it, and the plant and the machine, both mothers that listen, settled each other. The rational mind loathes rules it cannot enforce. I tried to break the rule in safe rooms. At noon, with traffic below and laundry above and a radio down the hall, I whispered my mother's name into the recorder. Playback gave me the most ordinary sound of all. A woman in a room where other people existed. At 3 a.m., when the building becomes a ship and pipes take on the work of whales, I whispered it again. Playback gave me that same polite electricity. The thing that cared about my voice stayed where it belonged, under a canopy that could lean. Months later, another voicemail arrived, as shameless and empty of provenance. Breath, a click tapes used to make, as if a far place had learned the etiquette of our machines, to comfort or taunt me. I stood with my hands on the kitchen counter and did not cry, until I realized no one would be hurt if I did. When I did, I made noise, ordinary human noise, unspectacular, private, not a signal to any canopy anywhere. I did not go back. I do not tell people not to. If you go, bring hands that can say yes and no and thank you. Bring patience that can sit with others and make no sound but warm rice. Bring a name you can live without for a while. Do not bring your mother unless you can keep her in your pocket like a smooth stone. The forest isn't a villain. It is a creature with a rule. We are the ones who think we can live without them. If you must ask for permission, ask the stump. It has an ear for it. If it answers, I hope it answers. With a light, with a leaf, blown softly toward your ear. With a zipper you are proud to obey. The recorder sits on my desk, like an animal at a window. Some mornings I lean close and hear a hum that is either old circuits or grief trying not to look foolish. I imagine a canopy attending like a god who refuses worship and allows only etiquette. I imagine a village holding its breath for each other. I imagine leaving a bead on an old stump and promising to spend my voice on the living. I imagine saying my mother's name without sound and hearing her laugh inside my mouth. And I understand that some love is only dangerous where the trees can hear it. Night shift makes everything mechanical. Your heartbeat, your coffee, your faith. On the 𝗦𝗓𝗔𝗥𝗬 rig, midnight carried a note we couldn't hear but couldn't ignore. We called it 0 hour. The ocean called it something older. My job was simple in manuals. Keep the sonar honest. Wake the sensors when they lied. Make sure alarms didn't practice for attention. I was not trained to wake at the helipad fence with my fingers woven into chain link and no memory of walking there. The anomaly came like a pulse, a wave recorded at 0.7 cycles per second. Too low to hear, too steady to be chance. The scope drew it as a gentle curve rising, falling, the way whole bodies breathe in sleep. Tariq, rope deck with a permanent windburn, leaned over my shoulder one night and tapped the line. "You'll feel it, even if you don't," he said, meaning the ache under the jaw, the way minutes collapse like tents in wind. He had a string tied to his pencil now. Said it helped, said it didn't. CCTV showed us neat impossibilities. Frame 1. Tariq walking past the orange safety doll we use for drills. Frame 2. Both gone. Frame 3. Tariq 6 steps further. The doll's molded head turned toward the lens. Wind can bully, but it can't choose that gesture. When I slowed the footage, my stomach understood before my brain. Those were edits. Someone, or something with the right to, had spliced the night to taste. You learn the rig's music quick, the diesel's stomachache thrum, the violin whine of cable when the wind saws it, the winter groan of metal remembering glaciers. 0 hour added a pressure under teeth, a rhythm feet wanted to meet. I set an alarm to chime every 2 minutes to prove continuity. Chime, chime, then nothing. When I found myself again, I was at the helipad fence, with my fingers whitening around wire, and the sea throwing old knives at the legs below. It felt like waking in the middle of a sentence you didn't begin. I hauled the field recorder out to the catwalk, because fear, like boredom, lends itself to science. The wind wrote its squall on the mic. Beneath that, a thread too low to be called sound tugged my bones into time. I watched my steps begin to match it, the way soldiers forget their mothers and become one animal marching. I stopped walking. The safety doll stood 20 paces ahead, orange against steel, arm lifted at a wrong, interrupted angle. Behind it, the helipad lights burned halos into mist. In the rack room, the anomaly plotted like weather. I ran the wave through the software meant to coax confession out of whales. The sonogram printed a fabric of arches and teeth. I mapped the fattest peaks against the rig S history. The memorial names we don't, to say at parties. The storm seasons we pretend to have beaten. The loudest nights lined up with loss. I brought Ina, our foreman, the overlays. "If it's grief," she said, rubbing a red knuckle, "why does it make us walk?" "Because grief is a current," I said, disliking my own mouth, and something replayed a path until the rig learned it by heart. A storm flowered on the far line, lightning practicing inside like thought. Tools migrated inches during sleep. A pencil we'd lost came back tied to my wrist with a string in my knot. I laughed like a person who doesn't want an answer. At 0 hour, crew rose like parishioners. Their mouths were relaxed, eyes open, respectful as if answering roll. They walked toward the pad in that careful, inevitable way you move in dreams when floor gives you nothing back. I called names, clapped, snapped, made noise that fought the rhythm and lost. Ina stationed herself at the fence and planted bodies there by the shoulders. "You're fine," she told them with the authority of math, and kept telling them until their eyes agreed. We caged the orange doll in the tool locker because it kept appearing where it shouldn't be, by bunks, by doors, once facing the sea as if listening. We laughed while we looped Jane through its hollow arm. The laughs thudded and died and no one commented. I cut power to the sonar racks at the peak of a later night. You cannot unplug the ocean, but you can refuse to be an amplifier. The wave softened on the scope, like a sleeper rolling away from a bad dream. Tariq's voice shook over the radio. "I was halfway up the outbound ladder," he said. "Was I going somewhere?" "Home," I told him. "In any direction not down counted." Morning bled yellow through wet mesh. We found wet footprints on the helipad, bare and small. They crossed to the fence and ended, polite as a full stop. "Bird," someone said. "Gull," someone corrected. Because correction is a flavor of control. No gull walks like that. We agreed anyway because agreement is one of the tools that keeps people alive. A satellite burp delivered an email from my father weeks late. Subject: listen. Body: listen. No photo of him on the Karachi jetty. Hand lifted against sun. The joke he made about my job and his age. The minutes chimed on time until they didn't. When I arrived where the missing chime had gone, my palms were pressed flat to the fence, as if I had been praying to the weather. We added second bodies to 0 hour watches. Some wore earplugs like talismans. Some hummed wrong tempos under their breath to throw off the pull. An elastic band for the soul. The doll sat in its cage with its head cocked toward the sea. No one turned it. Of course, someone turned it. Of course, the storm that finally chose us made noon out of midnight. Rain welded itself sideways to railings. The wave asked with everything it had. A line of sleepwalkers formed and broke and formed again. Their feet learned betrayal, knee, heel, toe. And I wanted to weep from how beautiful survival looks when it's ugly. I knelt in a corridor and pretended to pick up a dropped bolt. It is a childish trick. It works. Feet obey lies that look like work. I passed that lie down the line like a prayer and watched shoulders unlock one by one. Ina braced herself in the doorway and caught a man Ia's sleeve with 2 fingers and no ceremony. Lightning showed every rivet like a confession and left us blind again. By dawn, the rig relaxed into smaller terrors. Inventory, rust, coffee that tastes like burned apology. The wave subsided to its low, familiar pressure, an ache under the jaw that sometimes was nothing and sometimes was a hand. I filed a report that said, install dampers, alter schedule to overlap warm bodies, and investigate EM coupling on catwalk runs. Because there are words you can buy and words you cannot. I kept the wave files on a drive labeled training audio, so no one would tidy grief. Sometimes at night I solo the wave in headphones and stack 3 good recordings until a shape appears where a voice would be. Not words. Need. Metal does not want, but the men who went over wanted names said out loud, wanted routes repeated, wanted someone to stand where they stood and prove the path existed. The rig is their mouth now, It is poorly shaped for speech. It dries. I have not left the sea. Not yet. I walk to the fens at noon sometimes, just to prove I can do it awake. I look down through the grate at the old knives the water throws, and count rungs I will not use. If I close my eyes, I can hear the word come written in the bottom of a wave. Not accusation, not welcome. The ocean asks, like weather asks, indifferently, constantly.